on this computer. Hi, Anne. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Anne and I are just going to do a very brief video of our takeaways from yesterday's meetup, which was conversations. Exactly what was the title? You know the title.
It was How to Speak for Those Who Cannot Speak for Themselves.
Thank you.
And that was inspired by a Jane Goodall quote that is, "The least I can do is speak out for those who cannot speak for themselves."
Right, right. So it was a small group. I loved the group. As I said to you when we were finished, I felt like there were just adults in the room and people who were very conscious of each other and not wanting to take up too much time, but had really important things to say. So I'm just going to go with what was the biggest takeaway for me, and probably came from what William was sharing about neither of his children being vegan and how he has had to make the decision, even though it's painful for him that they're not, that when they visit him and they go out, they are going to be ordering what they want to eat, which is not vegan. And as you know, from the years you've known me, the people who I have the most challenging time with are my family. And so my takeaway is that I started thinking about it as nesting concentric circles, and that the closer we are to the people in our lives who are not vegan, who we love, and who we want to have relationships with, we are going to behave, or I'll speak for myself, I behave differently with them than I might with a stranger that I meet on a train platform, and we get talking and I talk about what I'm passionate about in my life. I might question that person in a way that I'm not going to question a sibling, a niece, a nephew. So that was my takeaway, is that it really depends on the relationship and how careful we feel we need to be in that relationship. And so there's always this, for me, this tension of how much can I say, how little should I say?
Yeah, there's a certain type of navigating that you have to do.
That's a great word. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I think what you're referring to is that we have certain patterns in relationships, or certain roles that we are used to playing, which we won't have with somebody we're just meeting. We haven't established that quite yet. So that comes into play. I got, yep. Go ahead.
Let me just add, because what you said reminded me of something. I'm willing to take risks with neighbors or people who are acquaintances that I might not take with a family member. It's a little bit like the guy that goes to the bar and is going to spill all of his or her troubles to the bartender, who he or she will never see again.
Right. And well, that's the stakes, right? The stakes are higher with the people in your life who you can't lose. You can, but it would be devastating, so
and they're the people that you're eating meals with the most, or sharing a home with, or something else. And so it's what you want the most, and it's the one where you feel perhaps most cautious.
Right. One of the takeaway that I had from that, which was that I think when we can't speak, I think the best that we can do is really acknowledge what's going on for us, and really honor that your feelings are valid, that and you're making this choice that sometimes you're going to not have that conversation. You're not going to do that because it doesn't feel safe enough, or you don't want to be that vulnerable, and that's for you to determine. So we all have that kind of that power to make those choices for ourselves. thing that we're doing or we're trying to help people do isn't about saying every single time you have to speak up, because otherwise it's not, you're not doing your, you're not doing the right thing. It's not really about that. It's about embodying compassion for yourself and for other people, and for of course for the animals. But one of the things that I thought of after the fact, because a lot of times like I just get thinking after these meetings, and then I'm like, oh, I wish I had thought of that during it. But and this goes along with what somebody else had said too about well, I'll just say it, and that is that, it probably wouldn't go over well to point at somebody's plate and say that's morally wrong. Right, we talked about that in the Zoom meeting, because of course, like it's kind of predictable that would bring up some defensiveness right away, and the person isn't going to necessarily be open and receptive to exploring that. But to be able to look and say something like, when you look at your plate, you see something, and when I look at your plate, I see someone. And while sometimes I really do have to work hard to compartmentalize that, and because I really just want to enjoy my time with you, because it does make me feel, I do feel sad sometimes about that. And then if we wanted to go that which we talked about in other meetings about making a request, if we wanted to, we could just leave it at that. But if we wanted to make a request, it could be, would you be willing to eat vegan when you're with me? So that's not something that is happening for me. We are allowed to make requests. I think that the trick is that if the person says no, that our response is really important, because if we get really mad about that or demanding about that, then we're not making a request, we're making a demand. So that's a lot of like the nonviolent communication stuff. But I thought that was a really important topic to bring up. And I think you kind of brought that up, and that led into other things.
Well, as you know, that is a perennial problem for me, because I spend time with my family. I love my family. And so it comes up, and I'm always torn with, am I doing enough? Am I saying enough? And feeling some guilt that I am not speaking up for those who have no voice.
What's your biggest fear? Just a really quick question, but what's your biggest fear if you did speak up?
Alienation, and that my family would perceive it as judgment. And it isn't judgment, and yet I fear, and I know my family pretty well, and I think I'm probably not far off there, that they would see it as moral judgment. And even though I know that isn't what it is, and I love that you always focus on you letting them know how you feel. Not, I want you to do this, that, or I could ask for something. So, but yes, that is my biggest fear, is to alienate my family. And there are already enough other things in terms of our political views where we're on different sides of the ledger. So anyway, what was your biggest takeaway, Anne?
Well, that was one of them, just being able to say how we feel. We're not moralizing, we're not judging, we're just saying, look, this is my experience right now. And then it is okay to make a request. And just thinking that, like, how our brains kind of go into this mode where there are these two important things going on. One is that we're trying to tend to our own feelings, because when we're in that situation of trying to speak up in a space, whether it's family, friends, or wherever, where we are the outlier, and what we're saying is not the popular view, then we are, or my brain at least goes to, will they reject what I'm saying? Will they reject me? Will I feel worse for speaking up? Or will it feel worse when I walk away having said nothing? Will they feel judged and criticized? Will I feel judged and misunderstood? There's all these things going on, and it happens within like 30 seconds or something, and how we're trying to balance that. And this we talked about yesterday, how what I do, the remedy for that is like this exquisite self-care and self-compassion, and then I can show up. And to me, I guess what I'm trying to get to is that if I feel that I can speak from that compassionate place in me, not that judgmental place, but or frustrated place, but that compassionate place within me, then really anything I say is okay to say. Even if it's tough for the other person to hear. The fact that it might be tough for the other person to hear isn't a reason to not say it. If I'm feeling really judgmental and critical, that's a reason to walk away, take care of myself so that I can show up in a different headspace. So that's what came from that, from that conversation. There were other things that came up through the meeting, just about, like, we talked about taking taking history exercise and realizing that, you know, when we really acknowledge fully all those years that we were not vegan, because none of us were raised that way, and it took us varying time and input for us to shift. That helps.
I loved how William talked about, you know, how he lived 47 years, I believe. I lived 54 years.
Yeah.
You lived 30 something years.
Yeah, 30 something years. Yeah. It's amazing. And so when I look at other people and I say, how could they not see it? It helps me to be patient and be there in a compassionate way when I remember that I was really blind, you know, to a lot of it, to all of it at one point, and then less and less of it over time. So, you know, it's that difference between blindness and cognitive dissonance. When I started to feel uncomfortable is when I started to experience that cognitive dissonance, and that's what helped me along the way. Yeah.
So I think what you said and what I said are actually not too dissimilar, and it really speaks to the complexity of our relationships.
Yeah.
And this weighing, this cost-benefit analysis of what's the risk, what's the benefit, what's the potential cost, and how much of a risk am I willing to take? I don't think there's a whole lot of risk when I'm on the train platform.
Right.
But there is a lot of risk if it's a sibling or somebody who I may be a good friend, although I haven't felt like I have a problem really with friends. It really, for me, comes down to my family members and the people who I love the most and who I probably am somewhat dependent on.
Right. Yeah. So there's so much at stake.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know if this is true, if it's a goal to, like sometimes I think that if I just get better at this, or I just get more comfortable with this, that it increases my risk tolerance. And do you see it that way for you? Like, is it, as we go forward, is the goal, in other words, to increase your risk tolerance and maybe start to take some risks, more risks that you're not currently taking, or is it really just like, this is how it is? And
I think it's two things, and I think we should probably end with this. And I think this is perhaps maybe our next meetup will be about this. I think it's both risk tolerance and skill.
Okay.
So I think if I feel more confident about how I might speak in those situations that feel really fraught, then I probably would be more willing to take the risk. So I think it's practice, and that's
practice.
It's what I think we do with conversations, and what we try to do at these meetups.
Yeah.
So
then just final point, because it relates to exactly what you just said. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I think Dave brought this up at the end. And that is that I do think that sometimes we underestimate what the other person can take or can tolerate, can handle. And we're trying to gauge that and feel it out. And I do think sometimes it can be helpful to say, like, well, I have some feelings and thoughts about that. Are you willing to hear them? You know, to give that person the option and see if they can, because that kind of gives them a signal that this might be hard to hear, might be a little bit hard to hear, but I'm going to say,
a great point. I'm glad that you brought it up. So I think we have our topic.
Okay,
for the next meetup, which is going to be sometime around the middle of April.
yep,
So
sounds good.
thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See you
Bye.
soon.